Night draped the city in fear. Adana's eyes flew wide as both hands clutched her swollen stomach. Fingers splayed like a fragile shield, while a black SUV lurched across their car on the Zumba road. 8 months into her pregnancy, she could barely breathe when the driver hit the brakes, tires shrieking against asphalt. 2 masked figures jumped from the SUV, one lifting a gun. The guard in the front seat barked, "Down!" Gunfire slammed against the armored door like an iron storm. Amid the chaos, horns blaring, pedestrians scattering, Adana could hear nothing but the racing heartbeat of the life inside her. The second guard leaned across her body. "Madam, stay still. Trust me." The driver's knuckles whitened on the wheel. Then a voice rose from the SUV, chilling, familiar. "Bring her out." Adana's chest locked. The driver shoved the gear forward. Their car bolted, metal screeched as the SUV blocked again. The guard raised his radio. "Eagle 2, base, ambush at Zumba, engaging now." A shot cracked like thunder. The world vanished into white. 3 years earlier, Adana had been nothing more than a forgotten shadow in Lagos. Nights found her crouched beneath a fractured bridge, wicker basket clutched tight with stale bread rolls and cheap medicine rattling. Inside, dust clung to her bare feet as the roar of the city thundered overhead. At 19, her skin glowed dark under the rising sun, but hunger hollowed her frame, gnawed at her insides like a cruel thief. Each day was war, begging coins, bartering scraps, listening to her frail mother's cough echo through the shadows. Poverty wasn't merely a condition, it was a predator that never loosened its grip. Morning under that bridge carried its own merciless rhythm, the roar of traffic, the sharp calls of hawkers mocking her emptiness, the aroma of fried akara drifting from stalls she would never touch. Adana clutched her basket like it was treasure, her eyes scanning endlessly, for food, for kindness, for mercy. Around her, children shrieked with laughter, kicking dust into the air, their joy a cruel reminder of the innocence she had long since buried. She walked like a phantom through the crowd, invisible, unseen, surviving, but never belonging. Yet beneath, her exhaustion, fire smouldered. Hardship had hardened her into steel. She learned when to beg softly, when to snarl back, when to keep silent and endure. Nights she sat awake against the bridge pillars, whispering the prayers her mother had etched into her soul. Words were her armor against the cold, a desperate plea to a God who sometimes seemed deaf to her cries. Then, one morning, everything shifted. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a halt beneath the dusty bridge, its glossy panels reflecting the chaos of Lagos, the shouting vendors, the cracked asphalt, the poverty etched into every corner. That car did not belong here, nor did the man stepping out of it. Jonathan Okafor, billionaire, CEO of Zenith Holdings, a man whose empire stretched across continents, whose name opened boardroom doors. To Adana, he was simply another wealthy ghost, passing by. Fate had other plans. She never forgot the way his shadow fell over her as he stooped to lift the bread roll that had slipped from her basket. For the first time in years, a stranger's eyes met hers without disgust. He looked at her not as a beggar, but as though he saw something buried deep beneath the dust. That moment lingered like lightning frozen in air. Recognition, perhaps, or destiny tugging at unseen threads. Jonathan had not come seeking redemption. He was already drowning. His wife, Evelyn, had died suddenly, leaving him with a child to raise and an empire trembling under predatory rivals. Boardrooms circled like vultures, whispering at the edges of his power. Wealth had not shielded him from grief. Power had not freed him from loneliness. That night, beneath the bridge, he had sought only silence. Instead, he found Adana. It began simply. A ride offered, a warm meal. She resisted, used to broken promises, used to pity wrapped in poison. But Jonathan was different. He saw beyond the dirt and the hunger to the will burning in her gaze. He brought her into his marble halls and chandeliered rooms, where her bare feet echoed awkwardly against polished floors. Servants whispered, newspapers speculated, board members frowned. Yet Jonathan's stance never wavered. Adana refused to be a mold someone else poured her into. She stumbled often, but each misstep became a lesson. She listened more than she spoke, observed with sharp eyes, absorbed the mechanics of Jonathan's business dealings that he allowed her to sit in on. Hunger, once a constant in her belly, shifted into hunger for knowledge. Failure didn't crush her, it refined her. Each challenge sharpened her edges, carving a woman of formidable presence. But destiny never gifts without demanding. Jonathan's younger brother, David, carried envy like venom through his veins. To him, Adana was an interloper, a stain on the Okafor name. While Jonathan drew her closer, David sharpened knives in silence, poisoning investors with whispered doubts, hiring shadows in alleys, unearthing fragments of her past to destroy her future. The first strike landed in the boardroom. Adana, now standing tall beside Jonathan, presented a daring restructuring vision for Zenith Holdings. Her words flowed steady, her insight bold. Gasps circled the table. Jonathan's pride glimmered in his eyes, but David's smile was thin, cruel. He rose with deliberate grace, sliding a folder across the polished table. Inside lay photographs. Adana barefoot under the bridge, grime etched across her cheeks, a beggar clutching stale bread. His voice dripped venom. "This," he declared, "is the woman you entrust with our empire." Silence cloaked the room. Heat burned up Adana's neck, shame crashing down like a wave threatening to drown her. For a moment, her tongue froze. Then she felt Jonathan's hand under the table, anchoring hers. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Yes, this is the woman I trust, because she has risen from dust, and dust does not shatter." The boardroom fracture was only the beginning. Whispers slithered out of those walls, carried into newspapers, traded across trading floors, echoing in private dinners of Lagos elites. The billionaire and his beggar. Headlines painted Jonathan as reckless, blinded by infatuation. Investors grew restless. The empire he had built now trembled, not from foreign competitors, but from the storm his own family conjured. Adana watched in silence, her face unreadable, though inside her heart battled between shame and fury. She had lived all her life unseen, and now the world could not look away. Jonathan refused retreat. His wealth had taught him power, but his love for Adana taught him defiance. He held her hand in public, escorted her into banquets dripping with gold and diamonds where women in silks scoffed under jeweled masks. Adana walked through their scorn like fire through dry grass. Every sneer carved into her memory. Every whisper became fuel for the battle she now fought. For the first time, she realized this was no longer about survival. This was war for dignity. David escalated. With the arrogance of a man convinced of his own genius, he invited her to a charity gala, pretending reconciliation. Cameras flashed as she entered in an emerald gown Jonathan had chosen for her, the fabric flowing like water across marble. For a fleeting hour, she believed perhaps the tide had turned, but David had laced the stage with poison. He projected images on a massive screen, grainy videos of Adana scavenging, bartering scraps in the market, kneeling for coins in dust. Gasps filled the hall, laughter rippled like daggers. She stood frozen, throat burning, unable to breathe. Jonathan stormed the stage, fury radiating. "Enough!" His voice was thunder. But the damage was carved into every lens, every headline waiting for dawn. That night, Adana sat by the window of the Okafor mansion, her hands trembling, staring out at a world too vast, too cruel. She had walked into Jonathan's life with nothing but will. Now she wondered if she had given him ruin. Her mother's voice returned to her in memory, soft, hoarse from nights beneath the bridge. "Child, storms do not last. Even in darkness, light hides behind the clouds." Tears streaked Adana's face as she whispered those words aloud. That night, she made a vow. If the world would not grant her a place, she would carve one with her own hands. From the ashes of humiliation, she began her rise. Jonathan taught her the architecture of wealth, stock patterns, property negotiations, international politics. She consumed it all, mind sharp as flint, but she added her own grit, instinct, born from streets, the ability to read hunger in men's eyes, to sense deceit in their posture. She learned quickly that business was not boardrooms alone. It was survival dressed in silk. Months later, Zenith Holdings announced a bold expansion into renewable energy, a project Adana had architected quietly behind the scenes. Critics laughed. David scoffed publicly, but Adana unveiled contracts secured with African governments, partnerships with European firms, and local cooperatives that no outsider could have reached. She had stitched opportunity from the fabric of her own past. Connections, street vendors, activists, small-town leaders who remembered her hunger and trusted her heart. The boardroom that once scorned her now sat stunned, numbers flashing profit across the projector screen. The tide shifted. For the first time, Jonathan was not merely shielding her, he was following her lead. Investors applauded, rivals stumbled. David, cornered, gritted his teeth as applause rose for the woman he had tried to bury. Rage curdled into something darker. He unleashed shadows, not bound by law. A hired strike at one of their factories ended in flames. 2 workers injured. Threatening calls rattled the mansion's halls. Jonathan urged Adana to step back, to let him shield her. But she refused. If I step back, they win. And I did not survive dust and hunger to fall here. Her voice was iron. Her resolve drew strength from the child growing inside her. The pregnancy was unplanned, yet it became her anchor. Each flutter beneath her ribs reminded her of the legacy she carried now, the bridge between dust and dynasty. Jonathan knelt before her belly one night, his eyes wet. This child will never know the hunger you knew. She touched his cheek, whispering, and this child will never see us surrender. But fate rarely bends without blood. David, frantic in his unraveling, made his final move. The ambush on Zumba Road was not mere intimidation. It was assassination cloaked as robbery. The SUV that cornered their car carried men who did not intend to leave witnesses. Adana, breathless, clutched her stomach as bullets screamed against steel. Jonathan roared at the driver. Go! Protect her! Gunfire lit the night. A round shattered the window, grazing the guard's arm. The driver swerved, tires screaming. In the chaos, Adana's eyes caught the masked man in the SUV, the way his gaze lingered on her, almost familiar. Her chest froze. The car broke through, engine howling, but Adana's vision blurred. Fear crushed her chest. The last sound she heard was Jonathan shouting her name before darkness swallowed her whole. When she awoke, sterile white light filled her eyes. Machines beeped softly. Tubes tethered her to life. Her hand instinctively sought her stomach. Relief broke through when the nurse whispered, "Your baby is safe." Tears spilled unchecked. Jonathan sat beside her bed, exhausted, his suit stained, his face shadowed with despair. He grasped her hand like a drowning man clinging to shore. "I almost lost both of you," he whispered, voice cracking. She squeezed weakly, whispering, "Not yet. They will not take us." News spread quickly. Zenith Holdings' private jet was seen flying in mercenaries. Rumors of police investigations swirled. Whispers of David's involvement leaked. The city divided, some mocking, some rallying. But through the storm, Adana stood from her bed, frail, yet unyielding. "If I cower now, my child will inherit fear. I will not give him fear." The hospital became her battlefield of rebirth. Reporters camped outside, hungry for an image of the fallen beggar queen. Adana refused to be their spectacle. Each morning, even in pain, she sat upright, combed her hair, painted dignity onto her face. Nurses whispered, inspired by her refusal to break. Jonathan hired guards to shield her, but she knew no wall could guard her from destiny. She carried a vow in her chest. The next time she walked into the world, she would not walk as Jonathan's charity, nor as David's victim. She would walk as power itself. Weeks turned into months. The city moved forward with gossip, but Adana carved silence into weapon. She studied late into nights, poring over documents Jonathan brought, learning contracts, acquisitions, loopholes of law. Her hunger sharpened her faster than university ever could. Sometimes she stood at the window, watching neon lights paint, Lagos whispering to her unborn child, "One day you will see this city bow." The baby's kicks were like answers, tiny fists urging her on. When she returned, she did not choose grand entrances. She began in the margins, attending small community meetings, investment discussions that no Okafor had ever bothered with. She listened to fishermen, to market women, to activists shouting in crowded halls. She brought them proposals, microloans, and promises not in gold, but in dignity. Slowly, whispers shifted. Adana was not merely the billionaire's lover, she was becoming the people's voice. Her first great test came with the Energy Summit. Jonathan's advisors doubted her idea of fusing corporate investment with grassroots partnerships. Too messy, too unpredictable, they scoffed. But she pressed forward. On stage, her voice rang steady, recounting her life from hunger to boardroom, linking the fate of the streets to the fate of billionaires. "If you ignore the hungry, you build your house on sinking sand," she declared. Cameras captured her. Fire. Investors who once laughed now leaned forward. Deals closed before the week ended. David watched from shadows, his empire unraveling further. The humiliation ate him alive. He had weapons, Adana did not. Politicians in his pocket. Gangs. On payroll, tabloids hungry for scandal. Yet every strike he threw seemed to sharpen her image. Leaks of forged documents, she countered with transparency. Smear campaigns? She answered with truth, her face raw on live television, admitting scars but refusing shame. The public, long, weary of polished liars, began to believe her. One evening, she visited her old bridge. The crumbling concrete loomed like a grave of her childhood. Children still huddled there, clutching scraps, their eyes mirrors of her past. She knelt among them, placed bread into small hands, and whispered, "This story is not over." Cameras caught the moment, unplanned but electric. By morning, newspapers screamed, "From dust to dynasty, Adana's return." For once, the world's gaze did not mock. It admired. Jonathan, proud yet cautious, warned her of the cost. "They will come harder, Adana. They will not forgive you for rising." She smiled, her hand resting on her belly. "Let them come. I have carried hunger. I have carried shame. What else can they take?" He saw then, not just the woman he loved, but a storm wearing human skin. Her child's birth was both miracle and prophecy. Labor raged for hours, thunder cracking over Lagos as if the skies themselves bore witness. When her son finally wailed, into the night, Adana held him high, sweat streaking her face, whispering, "You will never beg. You will never kneel." Jonathan wept beside her, the boy's tiny fingers curling around his. News spread like wildfire. Lagos celebrated not just the heir of Zenith, but the birth of a dynasty reshaped. But David did not celebrate. He brooded in a penthouse drowned in liquor and rage. His plots grew darker, his alliances filthier. One night, in a drunken snarl, he hissed to his men, "If she will not crawl, then I will burn everything she loves." His empire had shrunk, but desperation made him dangerous. He poured his fortune into sabotage, recruiting mercenaries, bribing judges, manipulating ministers. His obsession was no longer wealth, it was Adana's destruction. Adana, sensing the storm, moved preemptively. She summoned journalists, whistleblowers, even former enemies, exposing corruption tied to David's businesses. Night after night, headlines bled with scandal. Money laundering, trafficking, fraud. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves. Investors fled. David roared in fury, smashing glasses against marble. But the tide had turned. What once was whispered in smoky rooms now thundered across the city. David Okafor was rotting. Yet victory did not taste sweet. Adana understood that power gained through exposure could vanish just as swiftly. She needed permanence. She began reshaping Zenith itself, transforming it from a family empire into a foundation rooted in people. Schools, clinics, renewable energy, grids sprouted under her guidance. The girl once mocked as beggar was now feeding nations. For every insult hurled at her, she built a monument of stone, but fate tightened its noose. David struck again, this time with law. He bribed a judge to issue warrants against Adana, accusing her of fraud, claiming she had seduced Jonathan into transferring assets illegally. Police arrived at the mansion in the dead of night. Cameras flashed as she was escorted into armored vans, her child crying in Jonathan's arms. The tabloids exploded. The Empire's queen in chains. Inside prison walls, damp and reeking. Of despair, Adana sat on the cold floor. For the first time since her rise, doubt clawed at her. Would the people believe she was guilty? Would her son grow up knowing his mother as prisoner? Yet even there, she refused to bow. She spoke to the women around her, thieves, debtors, forgotten souls, listening to their stories, giving them hope. Guards whispered that even behind bars, she ruled. Jonathan fought outside like a lion. His lawyers tore apart forged documents. His investigators revealed David's bribes. Slowly, truth seeped through. When the judge's corruption was exposed, the court erupted in scandal. By dawn, Adana walked free, her head high, her son waiting in her arms. The city roared with applause. She was no longer merely survivor or strategist. She was legend. David was cornered, but cornered animals bite deepest. With his wealth dwindling, he orchestrated chaos. Riots flared in neighborhoods where his men stirred anger. Fires gutted warehouses tied to Adana's initiatives, and whispers spread of assassins hired to end her once and for all. The city trembled, wondering if this feud of titans would drag them into ruin. For Adana, retreat was no longer an option. She had not risen from dust to surrender now. One night, under the shadow of neon-lit skies, she received a letter slid beneath her door. No signature, only a single phrase. Meet me where it began. The bridge. Her pulse quickened, the memory of childhood hunger echoing through her bones. Against Jonathan's pleas, she went. Cloaked in darkness, the bridge stood silent, a tombstone of her past. And there he was, David, gaunt yet burning, his suit hanging loose on a body wasted by rage. You should have stayed in the dirt, he spat, his voice trembling with both hate and desperation. I gave you nothing, and you dared to rise above me. That is a sin I cannot forgive. Adana met his eyes without flinching. You did not make me. Hunger made me. Pain made me. And now the world will watch you fall. The tension hung thick, the city's noise a distant hum as destiny crackled between them. David lunged, a knife glinting in his hand. But Adana was no longer the girl who had cowered under blows. She moved with instinct born of survival, grappling, forcing his wrist down. The blade clattered against concrete. For a moment, their struggle was not of billionaires, but of two children from Lagos streets, each clawing for air. His scream echoed as his grip faltered, collapsing beneath years of rot. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police swarmed, flashlights slicing the darkness. Jonathan arrived moments later, his voice breaking as he called her name. Officers restrained David, who spat curses as cameras recorded his downfall. The empire he had built on fear had crumbled, and now, shackled, he was nothing but a man undone by his own hatred. Adana stood tall, her breath ragged, but her spirit unbroken. The bridge that once symbolized her lowest point had now witnessed her greatest victory. In the weeks that followed, Lagos seemed to breathe easier. Courts stripped David of what little remained, sentencing him to decades behind bars. His name, once synonymous with power, became a cautionary tale. Adana, however, did not gloat. She told the press, "I did not win. The people won. The children who beg no more. The women who rise from silence. The city that refuses to kneel. That is, victory." Her words, simple yet fierce, carved themselves into history. Zenith transformed into something larger than wealth. Under Adana's command, it became a living movement. Solar grids lit up forgotten villages. Schools blossomed in corners where children once scavenged, and hospitals opened doors to the poor without demand for coin. Her story became textbook, film, and whispered legend. Children played games chanting her name. Mothers told daughters of the girl who fought hunger and returned as queen. But behind triumph, Adana remained human. Some nights, she still awoke, sweating, hearing echoes of her childhood cries, or the sting of David's blows. Jonathan would hold her close, reminding her, "Scars are proof you survived." She would smile faintly, watching their son sleeping peacefully, his tiny chest rising with dreams she once thought impossible. For him, she built not just empires, but futures unshackled by fear. Years later, at a global summit, leaders from across continents gathered to hear her speak. Cameras panned to her regal figure, her voice carrying with calm authority. "I was born beneath a bridge, forgotten, but every scar carried me here. Let this be proof that no soul is too small, no beginning too broken. Power is not gold. Power is the courage to rise." The hall erupted, applause echoing like thunder. Outside, as she stepped into the sun, her son ran to her, laughter filling the air. She lifted him into her arms, gazing at the horizon where the city stretched wide and restless. For a moment, she allowed herself stillness, breathing in the scent of rain-soaked earth, the sound of life moving forward. Her journey had begun, in dust, but it ended here, in light, in love, in legacy. And so, the tale of Adana was not just the story of one woman, but of a city, a people, a truth etched into history, that even in the deepest shadows, stars are born.